Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're going to talk about third-party relationship management, something a little bit different. And I'd like to welcome back to the show for his second appearance, I believe it is, Mark Carroll, founder of the Enterprise Risk Management Program at Boston University. Mark, welcome back.
Alex, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, Mark reached out to me to talk about this. Originally, when I first read it, I'll be honest, I thought it was third-party risk management, and I thought, yeah, okay, that sounds good. And then I reread it, it's like relationship management. Okay, Mark, what do you mean by that?
It's funny. TPRM has been coined, and the trade has already left the station, and it is a truly, associated with risk specifically. But the predecessor for that is the relationship itself. And I have the same conversations with people regarding risk in general, which is risk is, predicated on the concern regarding value. So I look at value and then I look at risk. I look at relationship, then I look at risk. So I think it's TPRM has been coined as risk, but I think there's a derivative there on what the value is because there's a lot more to the relationship than just risk. Risk is a key component, no question about that. But I have a relationship with a vendor, a third party, and it has a whole bunch of facets, only one of which is risk.
So when does this relationship management start? When you have the procurement RFP stage, when you're just getting to know someone, or does it really kick in and matter more after you've, signed the dotted line?
I think it starts at the very beginning. It's not uncommon for you to go through a procurement process, an RFP, et cetera, and pick the vendor you need, but then learn about others who you will use potentially in the future for that or other reasons. So I really believe it's a full life cycle that goes back to the very beginning of when we first meet and how we conduct ourselves and what the value proposition is and all that. And then at the end of the day, it's the selection of a given vendor, but again, I've dealt with vendors my whole career, and it's not uncommon to go back to somebody else and say, "Yeah, you didn't win this deal. You weren't providing this product or service, but we know you're strong somewhere else. Let's continue the conversation."
So what does relationship management entail in this context? I know building a relationship between people is one thing, but building relationships with third parties or clients, etc., uh, might have some different aspects to it. So what kind of things does it entail?
Well, it's a partnership, to be real frank and honest. It's when I hear third-party risk management and isolation, I think of a Heisman, the hand in separating us between parties. And in reality, it's a brotherhood, it's a relationship, it's a part of your extended enterprise where you do what you do as a firm, but you need partners and you need people who you can deal with up and downstream from a product and a service perspective. So I'll give you an example. We had a company I worked with years ago, a company that's provided cabling products to us. And we were very, very tight with them, very close with them. And they were literally 60% of all of our winding and cabling business. That's a deep relationship. Conversely, we were 40% of their revenue. So it's a bit of a deadly embrace there where we're highly dependent on each other. Um, well, what happened was we had brought in a brand new CFO who was very cost conscious and said, cut costs across the firm. We need to cut this back and it needs to be an arbitrary whatever. Well, we worked with this vendor, tried to get the numbers down. We got the numbers down, and they came back to us and they said, sorry, we're out of business. We're down. We're chapter 7. We're going out of business because you've effectively squeezed us out. Now, that's a relationship that broke down, predicated upon an adversarial situation related to cost, and that's not the way to do it. So it's important to know, who your vendor is and have a true partnership with that vendor rather than an ongoing sporadic, peddler kind of relationship. And I don't mean Alex the Coke and the sandwich provider. I mean somebody who you've got a deep product or service relationship with.
So how do you build that relationship? I know if we look at some old Hollywood movies, you build that relationship by going out for lunch all the time with your vendor. But it's more than that, right?
It's a lot more than that. And it may not even be that, to be real frank. I actually ran an export operation years ago, and the freight forwarders, that was the way they did things. I hesitate to say liquid lunches and whatever else, but that's not the best way to approach it. But it really is a getting an understanding. Now I'll give you another story. We had a third party vendor who we went to for recovery services, and we would do the classic, twice a year test and go up there, fail miserably, take people up there in a bus, bring them back down, come back in 6 months and do it again. And it was just a never ending order of failure. Well, we went back to that vendor and said, look, we need to test more often, and we need to, have a smaller group that tests to be successful and get it done end to end rather than fail every 6 months. And they said, "Oh, okay, great, but you don't have enough test time to do that in your contract." And I said, "Well, to be real frank," I said, "A, you've got a lot of spare capacity because in the third party brick and mortar recovery world, most people do not test. That's a fact. So they had a lot of empty days." I said, "Secondly, I said, we don't have a relationship." I said, I pay you every year, but the money's not sticky. The money could easily go to somebody else because we don't have that ingrained relationship with you. This will build that relationship." So we went back and forth, left, right, up, and down. And at the end of the day, they actually gave us a ton of test time added to our contract for free because they wanted that money to stay with them and they wanted us to be successful. That's a partnership. That's a little bit of a difference between showing up twice a year, kicking a tire, and going home. So I
Mhm.
think it's a relationship management activity that actually builds a foundation that includes risk, but it's bigger than risk.
So there, based on your example, there kind of has to be some win-win for both. It's not
Yes.
you or me getting the best from the vendor and the vendor's getting nothing. It's they're getting the best from me as well, right?
And
It
that's
has to be
fact.
win-win.
And like in my first example, your vendor has to make money.
Yeah.
You don't want to line somebody's pockets, but if your vendor's not making money, either because you price them out or they don't know their own cost structure internally, they put you at risk. So it's important that your vendor be financially viable and can survive and make money so they're there for you tomorrow. You need to make sure that you understand what they're up against and can support them financially. But again, not at the point of lining their pockets, okay, but at the point of making sure that they're a viable entity.
So how do you maintain a good relationship then? Because a lot of times you can have struggles, you go through things, but you go through a few years where everything just seems tickety-boo and all wonderful. And somebody at some point feels like they're being taken for granted. So how do you keep it going so that it's always beneficial for everybody?
Well, bring it back a little personal. It's the same thing you and I should be doing on things like LinkedIn. I haven't talked to Willie or Mary for a long time. I don't really have a need, but I'm going to reach out and say, "How's it going? What's going on in your world? Here's what's happening in my world," in a business sense, and not a Facebook sense, but a business sense. Um, but I think it's important to make sure you continue to foster that relationship over time, even if there isn't an issue on the table or a problem to solve. It becomes an ongoing activity. So you mentioned, having lunches with vendors. Well, sometimes that's a good thing to do periodically anyway. Not that you want a free lunch out of it, but at the end of the day, if you haven't had any ongoing activity with that vendor because things are smooth, when things are very smooth, that's often when you don't have any reason to talk to people. It's when you have to drill into that support channel with a problem that first of all, develop that strong relationship, and second of all, see how well they can perform under adverse conditions. When things are great, you have no reason to talk. And sometimes you need to find a reason, find something to do that keeps you in touch with that vendor.
I guess it's like our continuity programs and resilience programs, DR, if nothing is happening, you still have to challenge to make sure that nothing happens. Because if you ignore it, then the relationship falls apart, and then your relationship management becomes risk management.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Yeah. But if I can take a sidebar here,
Yeah,
one of
sure.
the things that I I get concerned about is in this day and age, we do a great job, I think, in common circles managing vendors from a sourcing perspective, where anybody who deals in risk deals with sole source, single source, making sure that they've got inventory, they can buffer it, all that kind of good stuff. Well, um, I look at our cloud situation in many company situations, and I say all those fundamentals around single and sole source have been cast to the wind a little bit. We get in front of one single vendor, we put our entire basket in their hands. We have no place to fall back to. We have no other operation. We can't inventory data. Um, and at the end of the day, both from a data perspective, call that inventory, and from a process perspective, call that software, we're heavily reliant on that single party. And we wouldn't do that anywhere else. Yet we do it with data in the cloud. And I just don't understand the logic behind, abandoning those fundamentals as it shows up in a cloud provider.
Yeah, that could be a topic all on its own. But
It
using
is.
that as an example, how do you maintain a relationship there? Or is it simply it's a done deal, so there is no relationship building because there are no other options?
Well, first of all, there are other options. You can always protect yourself. That's a separate issue. But that relationship, you can build it and it can be rock solid. But at the end of the day, that vendor, that cloud vendor, is one legal entity. So, you do a good due diligence job of defense in depth. They've got 5 locations, they're global, all that good stuff. I've tested their failover, et cetera. But at the end of the day, if they go down as an entity, if they close as a business, if they go Chapter 11, not by site, because it doesn't happen by site, it happens by legal party. If they disappear, you're in trouble. And they're not going to keep one site open for you or fail over to another site because they're just plain gone. Now, what firms can do is take care of themselves internally with their own backup of data or their own generation of reporting or something like that that says when this vendor is gone, I have something to fall back to. It isn't pretty, it isn't clean, but think about your whole world being in the hands of a cloud provider and you're just lost. You don't have anything. That's a survival issue.
I guess that also goes back to what you mentioned earlier on of if a vendor didn't meet requirements for one contract, if you've maintained a relationship with them, you've got someone, uh, shall we say, kind of already lined up that, hey, maybe you could help us out with this then, because this entity
Mhm.
is in trouble. You still have
For
that
sure.
relationship. You built it, right?
Yes. But you've got to, beyond that, simply having that relationship, you've got to be able to um, set them up to be successful.
Yeah.
So, if you've got an XYZ ERP system that's cloud hosted, and that's all you've got, and you don't have any backup for that, then that other vendor may say, "I'm here for you," but they can't help you because there's no data there. There's
Right.
nothing to give them. So I worked with a company that would generate reports every night, and they were soft copy reports that they would store and ship to another location. That way, they had their inventory balances every morning. They never used them, and they overlaid them every single day, but they had them. And they could fall back to them if they had to. So there is a dimension of protecting yourself that you can do. It isn't pretty, and it isn't going to guarantee that you're going to be up and running in an hour, but it does put you in a mode to be able to survive.
Well, we've come to the end of the episode. Any final thoughts you'd like to share on third-party relationship management?
Um, no, except understand your vendor and let them understand your business within intellectual property limits, because it's a partnership. It really is. You could someday decide to vertically integrate or not, and that vendor may be somebody who can help you with that. They may be somebody who you acquire, but also separately, make sure you've got good understanding of the relationship from a cyber perspective. And we didn't talk about that, but once you put them on your network, if you've got an 8 foot wall around your perimeter and they've got a 2 foot wall and they're on your network, then you have a 2 foot wall. And it's important to know that. It's really important to keep them, at some degree of arm's length from a data perspective, and make sure they've got um, the controls in place to be as strong as you are, or else they weaken your environment.
Yeah, and I guess with relationship management too is you said the 2 foot wall, 2 foot wall is you have to see each other as equals for a
Yes,
relationship to work, right?
there's got to be a balance there. There really has to be. It's got to be a peer relationship, and like I say, your vendor has to be successful financially. You've got to help them with that.
Yeah. On that note, we've come to the end of the show. Mark, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on third-party relationship management. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. I appreciate this. This is great.